My wife cheated while I worked double shifts to pay her debts, so I filed for divorce, took the house, and never looked back again. I'm a 29-year-old guy, and for most of my marriage, my entire identity revolved around being reliable, hardworking, and emotionally steady. I took pride in being the one who didn't crack under pressure, the one who showed up early and stayed late, the one who could carry weight without complaining. When I met my wife, she felt like someone who needed that stability. She was charming, emotional, and open about her struggles in a way that made me want to protect her. Early on, she admitted she was buried in credit card debt and student loans, laughing it off like it was just bad luck mixed with youth. I remember her saying, "I just need a fresh start. I've never had someone really in my corner before." I wanted to be that person. So I stepped up without hesitation. I picked up double shifts, volunteered for weekend overtime, and started doing side gigs after work, telling myself it was temporary. I remember coming home at midnight, hands aching, clothes smelling like grease and sweat, and still feeling proud when I saw her asleep on the couch. She'd wake up sometimes and say things like, "This won't be forever. Once this debt is gone, we're finally going to live." I believed her. I needed to believe her. The exhaustion was constant, but so was the sense of purpose. Every paycheck felt like progress, every paid bill like proof that love meant sacrifice. Friends would tell me to slow down, to take care of myself, but I brushed it off. "This is what marriage is," I'd say. "You grind now so you can breathe later." What I didn't realize back then was how quiet the house had become. How conversations slowly turned shallow. How her reassurances started sounding rehearsed instead of heartfelt. I was so focused on holding everything together that I didn't notice the cracks forming under my feet. While I was breaking my body to protect our future, something else in our marriage was quietly rotting, and I had no idea how close I was to finding out. For a long time, I told myself the debt was the enemy, not the marriage. If we could just get past that, everything else would fall back into place. I reorganized my entire life around numbers, due dates, interest rates, minimum payments. I skipped meals at work, stopped seeing friends, and wore the same worn-out boots long past when they should have been replaced. Every sacrifice felt justified because it had a purpose. She used to say, "You're saving us," and those words kept me going when my body felt like it was running on fumes. What slowly started to bother me was how little I actually knew. Despite me earning almost all the income, she insisted on managing the finances. "It stresses me out when you look at the accounts," she'd say, or "I don't want you worrying about it on top of everything else you do." It sounded considerate, almost loving. When I asked questions, she'd smile and reassure me, tapping my chest and saying, "That's your job, being strong. This part is mine." I wanted to trust her. I needed to. But then small things didn't add up. A new jacket showed up in the closet. Her phone got upgraded even though we were supposedly cutting expenses. Charges appeared on the card that didn't match anything I recognized. When I asked, she always had an answer ready. It was on sale. My old one finally died. I had to put it on the card, but I'll make it up next month. Each explanation sounded reasonable on its own. Together, they formed a noise I learned to ignore. The worst part is how she made me feel for even noticing. If I pressed too hard, her tone would change. She'd accuse me of not trusting her, of turning money into control. "I thought you were different," she said once, eyes glossy. I remember apologizing immediately, feeling ashamed for questioning the woman I was supposed to protect. So I stopped asking. I buried the doubt under longer hours and deeper exhaustion. I told myself this was what love looked like, one person carrying the weight so the other could breathe. But somewhere in the back of my mind, a quiet thought started to form: if the debt was shrinking like she claimed, why did it feel like we were sinking faster than ever? The longer I worked those hours, the lonelier the house felt when I came home. At first, I told myself it was normal. We were adults. We were tired. Real life wasn't supposed to feel like the honeymoon phase forever. But there was a difference between comfortable silence and the kind of quiet that felt hollow. She stopped asking how my day went, stopped waiting up for me, stopped noticing when I came in with bloodshot eyes and hands that wouldn't stop shaking from exhaustion. Most nights, she'd already be in bed, phone glowing against her face, barely looking up when I said her name. Physical affection slowly disappeared, too. A kiss became a peck. A hug felt rushed, like a chore she was checking off. When I tried to talk about it, she'd sigh and say, "You're always tired. I don't want to bother you." Somehow, that explanation always twisted things back onto me. I started believing I was the problem, that my absence, my work, my constant fatigue had pushed her away. So instead of pulling back, I worked harder, convinced effort would fix what distance had broken. There were moments that stuck with me in uncomfortable ways. I'd sit at the kitchen table at 2 a.m., eating leftovers alone, while she laughed softly in the other room at something on her phone. When I asked what was funny, she'd shrug and say, "Just a meme." Her phone never left her hand. It followed her to the bathroom, to the couch, even to bed, turned face down whenever I walked into the room. I noticed. I just didn't let myself question it. Publicly, though, she was perfect. Holding my arm at family gatherings. Complimenting me in front of friends. Calling me her rock. People would tell me how lucky she was to have a husband like me, and I'd feel proud and empty at the same time. It was like living two versions of the same marriage, one for the world, and one that existed behind closed doors. I started feeling like a guest in my own life. I paid the bills, fixed what broke, and kept everything running, but I wasn't really there. The more invisible I felt, the harder I tried to earn my place again. What scares me now is how normal that loneliness became, and how I mistook emotional starvation for loyalty, not realizing it was slowly hollowing me out from the inside. The first time something truly didn't add up, it was over something stupidly small. She told me she was meeting a friend after work, someone I'd heard about before but never met. I didn't think twice about it until a few days later when she mentioned the same night again, only this time, the details were different. The restaurant changed. The time shifted. The friend's name slipped. I remember standing in the kitchen, holding a glass of water, my brain stalling as I tried to line the two versions up in my head. I laughed it off in the moment. "Didn't you say it was a different place?" I asked casually. Her smile froze for half a second, just long enough for me to notice, before she waved it away. "No, you must have misunderstood. You're always exhausted," she said, like it was obvious. The way she said it made me feel stupid for even bringing it up. I apologized without really knowing why. But after that, I started noticing how often I was told I'd misunderstood things. Dates didn't line up. Stories changed slightly each time they were told. When I asked for clarity, her tone would sharpen. "Why are you interrogating me?" she snapped once. "I already told you what happened." The conversations always ended with me backing down, convinced I was being unfair. One night, I tried to explain how disconnected I'd been feeling. I told her I missed her, that I felt like we were drifting apart. She crossed her arms and said, "Maybe if you were actually home, things would be different." That sentence hit harder than I expected. It felt like all my sacrifices were being quietly erased. I went to bed that night staring at the ceiling, wondering when being dependable turned into being disposable. Still, I didn't let myself connect the dots. I told myself every marriage has rough patches, every couple miscommunicates. I clung to that belief because the alternative, that something was seriously wrong, felt too heavy to carry on top of everything else. What I didn't realize was that this wasn't confusion or stress anymore. It was the beginning of a story she was carefully rewriting, one where my exhaustion made me easy to gaslight, and where the truth was already slipping further out of reach. I wasn't looking for proof. That's the part one still repeat to myself, because it matters. I wasn't snooping, wasn't digging, wasn't trying to catch her in anything. It happened on an ordinary night, the kind that had become routine. I came home later than usual, shoulders burning, head buzzing, and found her phone plugged in on the kitchen counter. The screen lit up when I walked past it. Just for a second. long enough to see a name I didn't recognize and a message preview that made my stomach drop. Can't stop thinking about last night. I stood there frozen, the hum of the refrigerator suddenly loud in my ears. My first instinct was to rationalize it. Maybe it was taken out of context. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe it wasn't what it looked like. I hated myself for how fast my heart started racing, for how my hands shook as if my body knew something my mind was still refusing to accept. I didn't touch the phone. I didn't open it. I just stared at it like it might explode. When she came into the kitchen, I must have looked off, because she asked, "You okay?" I nodded too quickly and said I was just tired. She unplugged her phone immediately and slid it into her pocket, a movement so automatic it felt practiced. That night, I barely slept. My brain kept replaying that single line over and over, searching for a version where it meant nothing. Over the next few days, the feeling didn't go away. It got heavier. I started noticing patterns I'd ignored before, how she angled her phone away from me, how notifications were suddenly silenced, how she stepped outside to take calls she used to answer freely. Every instinct I had told me something was wrong, but I was terrified of confirming it. Once you know, you can't unknow. I argued with myself constantly. Looking would make me the bad guy. Looking would mean I didn't trust my wife. Looking would shatter whatever fragile peace we still had. But not looking felt worse. It felt like standing in a burning house, convincing myself the smoke was just in my head. One night, while she was in the shower, her phone buzzed again from the nightstand. This time, I didn't look away. I reached for it, my chest tight, knowing that whatever was on that screen was about to change everything, whether I was ready or not. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. I told myself I'd just glance, just enough to calm my imagination. But the second I unlocked it, the truth hit me all at once, sharp and unforgiving. There wasn't one message. There were dozens. Long threads filled with hearts, inside jokes, and plans that didn't include me. I scrolled through photos I was never meant to see, her smiling in ways she hadn't smiled at me in months, drinks on tables I didn't recognize, hotel mirrors catching reflections of a life she lived while I was working nights. What crushed me wasn't just that she was cheating. It was how long it had been going on. Months. Maybe longer. Long enough that this wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness, it was a routine. The man knew about me. He joked about my shifts, about how your husband's always gone anyway. I remember reading that line and feeling something in my chest crack open. My exhaustion wasn't an inconvenience to her. It was a convenience. I sat on the edge of the bed, the sound of the shower running, and kept scrolling even though every part of me wanted to stop. There were screenshots of my bank transfers, messages where she bragged about dinners and trips I unknowingly paid for. "He's taking extra shifts again," she wrote once. "We're good." Seeing my effort reduced to a funding source made me feel small in a way I'd never felt before. When she came out of the bathroom, wrapped in a towel, she froze. She knew immediately. Her face went pale, then hard. "Why are you going through my phone?" she demanded, like that was the real crime. I asked her how long. She didn't answer at first. Then she said, "Does it even matter?" like the damage was already done. In that moment, the marriage I thought I was saving collapsed completely. I wasn't a husband. I was a resource. And as I looked at her standing there, unashamed and defensive, I realized this wasn't just betrayal, it was deliberate. Planned. And the worst part was knowing this was only the beginning of how far she was willing to go. I expected yelling. I expected tears. I expected some kind of panic or regret. What I didn't expect was how calm she became once she realized the truth was out. She sat down on the edge of the bed, crossed her legs, and looked at me like I was the one who needed explaining. "I didn't plan for it to happen like this," she said, rubbing her temples, already exhausted by the conversation. Not by what she'd done, by having to deal with me finding out. I asked her why. Not angrily. Not even loudly. Just why. She let out a short laugh and said, "You were never around." That was it. Months of lies reduced to a single sentence. I reminded her of the double shifts, the weekends, the side jobs. I reminded her that every hour I spent away was to clean up the mess she brought into our marriage. She shrugged and said, "I didn't ask you to work yourself to death." Hearing that made my stomach turn. When I asked if she felt guilty, she hesitated just long enough to answer wrong. "I was lonely," she said, like it justified everything. Like my absence erased her vows. She didn't apologize, not really. She framed it as something that happened to her, not something she chose. At one point, she even said, "If you'd paid more attention to me, this wouldn't have happened." I felt myself go numb. The conversation spiraled from there. She admitted the affair but minimized it, insisting it was emotional at first, then physical, then complicated. She kept saying she never meant to hurt me, while explaining exactly how she used my money to keep it going. The lack of remorse hurt more than the cheating itself. It told me I'd never mattered the way I thought I did. Eventually, I stopped arguing. I stopped explaining. I realized nothing I said would make her see me as a person instead of an obstacle. She noticed the shift and asked, "Why are you so quiet?" I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. That night, I slept on the couch, staring at the ceiling, listening to her move around the house like nothing had changed. But everything had. The man who believed effort could fix anything was gone, and I didn't yet know what would replace him. The weeks that followed felt unreal, like I was watching my own life from a distance. We still lived in the same house, moved through the same rooms, but we were strangers pretending not to notice each other. She acted entitled to normalcy, as if the affair was just an uncomfortable phase we needed to get past. She still used the joint card, still ordered packages, still made plans that assumed I'd keep everything running. Meanwhile, I felt like something inside me had gone hollow. I stopped sleeping properly. When I did sleep, I woke up with my heart racing, my jaw clenched so tight it ached. I went to work exhausted beyond words, my body on autopilot while my mind replayed messages I wished I'd never read. Coworkers asked if I was okay, and I lied automatically. "Just tired," I said, because the truth felt too big to explain and too humiliating to say out loud. At home, she oscillated between irritation and false sweetness. One night she said, "You can't punish me forever," like I was the one being unreasonable. Another time she reached for my hand and said, "We can fix this if you stop shutting down." I pulled away without thinking. The idea of her touch made my skin crawl. I realized then how deeply broken something was inside me. Rock bottom hit on a Tuesday night. I came home after a 14-hour shift, opened the fridge, and stared at the shelves without really seeing them. My legs gave out, and I sat down on the kitchen floor, still in my work boots, back against the cabinet. I didn't cry. I just sat there, numb, listening to the clock tick and wondering how I'd let my life get this far away from me. I thought about how much of myself I'd given up, my time, my health, my sense of worth, for someone who treated me like a wallet with a pulse. The realization was suffocating. I wasn't just betrayed. I'd been erased. That night, lying alone on the couch, staring into the dark, a quiet thought settled in for the first time. I couldn't keep surviving like this. Something had to change. I just didn't know yet whether that meant leaving, or becoming someone she no longer recognized at all. The change didn't come with a dramatic speech or a slammed door. It came quietly, almost invisibly. After that night on the kitchen floor, something inside me went cold and clear. I stopped trying to understand her. I stopped hoping for remorse. Instead, I started observing. Listening. Taking notes in my head. While she thought I was still broken and stuck, I was finally thinking straight. I began staying late at work, but this time it wasn't just exhaustion or avoidance. On my lunch breaks, I sat in my car and made calls I never thought I'd have to make. A lawyer. Then another, just to be sure. I spoke in a low voice, heart pounding, as I explained my situation to strangers who didn't interrupt or judge. They just asked questions. Practical ones. About income. Assets. The house. The debt. For the first time in months, the conversation wasn't about feelings, it was about facts. At home, I changed my behavior just enough to confuse her. I stopped confronting her completely. No questions. No arguments. No visible anger. She noticed immediately. "You're acting weird," she said one night, watching me from across the room. I shrugged and said I was tired. That answer used to satisfy her. Now it made her uneasy. She started hovering, asking what I was thinking, whether I was okay. I gave her nothing. Behind the scenes, I gathered documents. Pay stubs. Bank statements. Proof of every payment I'd made toward her debt, every bill I'd covered alone. I learned things that made my stomach turn: how much I'd actually paid, how little she'd contributed, how exposed I'd been without realizing it. Each discovery hurt, but it also strengthened my resolve. She still assumed I was trapped. Still talked about working through things like it was inevitable. One night she said, "You're not the type to walk away." I almost laughed. She had no idea that the man she thought she knew was already gone. By the time she realized I'd stopped reacting altogether, it was too late. The pieces were already in motion. And while she slept peacefully beside her secrets, I lay awake planning an exit she never saw coming. I filed the paperwork on a Thursday morning, right before work, hands steady in a way that surprised even me. No speech. No warning. No last attempt to talk things through. Just signatures, copies, and a quiet sense of finality as I slid the documents across the desk. The lawyer looked at me and said, "Once this is served, everything changes." I nodded. I already knew. She found out that evening when a process server knocked on the door. I was in the garage pretending to organize tools when I heard her voice rise, sharp and confused. "What is this?" she demanded, storming toward me with the papers shaking in her hands. Her face had gone pale, eyes darting across the words like they might rearrange themselves into something less real. "You filed for divorce?" I didn't yell. I didn't explain myself again. I just said, "Yes." That single word seemed to knock the air out of her. She laughed once, nervously, and said, "You're being dramatic. We can fix this." When I didn't respond, the panic set in. Her tone shifted fast, from disbelief to anger to desperation. "You can't do this to me," she said. "What am I supposed to do?" That was the moment everything flipped. For months, I'd been the one drowning, begging for honesty, stability, some sign that I mattered. Now she was the one spiraling. She started talking about money almost immediately: rent, bills, her debt. I watched her realize, in real time, that my income was no longer hers by default. That the safety net she'd been standing on was gone. She cried that night. Real tears. She apologized in a way she never had before, saying she made a mistake, that she didn't mean for things to go this far. She promised therapy, change, transparency, everything I'd once begged for. I listened quietly, feeling nothing but distance. As she spoke, I understood something with painful clarity: she wasn't afraid of losing me. She was afraid of losing what I provided. And standing there, watching her scramble, I knew I'd made the right choice, no matter how hard the next steps would be. The weeks after filing were brutal, but they were also strangely clarifying. The legal process stripped everything down to facts: who paid what, who owned what, who carried the debt. There was no room for her version of events, no space for emotional spin. Just documents. Numbers. Timelines. And for the first time since our marriage began, the truth worked in my favor. The house became the biggest point of contention. She assumed we'd sell it and split the equity, already talking about what she would do with her share. I watched her confidence crack during one meeting when her lawyer went quiet, flipping through paperwork with a frown. The mortgage had been paid almost entirely from my income. The down payment came from my savings. Even the utilities traced back to my account. Her debt, on the other hand, was clearly hers, and I'd been paying it voluntarily, not jointly. When the decision came down, it felt unreal. I kept the house. She kept her debt. No dramatic courtroom moment. Just a sentence read aloud that changed everything. She looked at me like I'd betrayed her all over again. "You're really doing this," she whispered afterward, like I was the villain. I didn't answer. I didn't owe her an explanation anymore. She tried one last time to pull me back emotionally. Late-night texts. Tearful voicemails. Reminders of who we used to be. She even mentioned the other man once, claiming it was over, that he'd disappeared the moment things got real. I believed that part. People like him don't stay when there's nothing left to take. Walking through the house alone after she moved out was overwhelming. Every room held memories, some good, most painful, but they felt different now. Lighter. Like the walls could finally breathe. Friends and family started hearing the full story, and their reactions stunned me. Anger on my behalf. Support I didn't know I needed. Validation I'd been starved of for years. For the first time in a long while, I slept through the night. Not because everything was fixed, but because I wasn't carrying someone else's lies anymore. And standing there in the quiet, I realized the hardest part was over. What came next would finally be mine. It's strange how silence can feel so loud when you finally have it. After everything was finalized, after the papers were signed and her things were gone, I spent a lot of nights just sitting in the living room with the lights off, listening to the house settle. No phone buzzing. No arguments waiting to happen. No anxiety about what I'd walk into next. Just quiet. And for the first time in years, that quiet didn't scare me. I won't pretend I healed overnight. There were mornings I woke up with my chest tight, reaching for a version of my life that didn't exist anymore. I replayed moments, wondering how I missed the signs, how I let myself be reduced to a paycheck and a safety net. The anger came in waves, then faded into something heavier, acceptance. Not forgiveness. Just clarity. I started doing things for myself again. Small things at first. Cooking real meals. Sleeping full nights. Letting my body recover from years of running on empty. The house slowly stopped feeling like a battleground and started feeling like mine. I rearranged rooms, repainted walls, got rid of anything that reminded me of who I was when I thought love meant self-destruction. She reached out a few times after everything was done. Short messages. Long apologies. Once, she asked if we could talk for closure. I didn't respond. I already had it. Closure didn't come from hearing her regret, it came from choosing myself without asking permission. What stays with me now isn't just the betrayal. It's the lesson. I learned that loyalty without boundaries is self-abandonment. That being needed isn't the same as being loved. And that walking away doesn't mean you failed, it means you finally stopped betraying yourself. I still live in that house. Not as a reminder of what I lost, but as proof of what I survived. I'm not the man who thought sacrifice could fix everything anymore. I'm stronger, quieter, more careful with my trust. And when I look back now, I don't feel the urge to chase explanations or justice. I took what was mine, rebuilt my life piece by piece, and never looked back, not because it didn't hurt, but because I finally understood my worth.